All right, we'll convene. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Good afternoon. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Sandro Galea. I have the privilege of serving as Dean of the School of Public Health here. This is one of our Dean's seminars on contemporary issues in public health, and usually we do these as lunchtime talks, lunchtime discussions, and they're anchored around something that's very much on our minds that has implications for public health. And we've done a mix of formal presentations as well as conversations and discussions like we are doing today. So we're delighted with today's panel. So you may have gathered from the news that there's a new president, and we thought that this would be a good time to do a session that's called a wish list for the new president. And we have an outstanding panel today that is going to be discussing this. So first of all, the panel is going to be moderated and facilitated by our own Professor David Jones. Just very briefly, David is an assistant professor in the Department of Health Law, Policy and Management. He has written quite a bit, but I'll just point out that his latest book called Exchange Politics is coming out in a few months, and it's about how states navigated the politics on implementing insurance exchanges under Obamacare, which is certainly an interesting topic in evolution right now indeed. David also is the editor-in-chief of Public Health Post. For those of you who have not seen Public Health Post, it is one of the school's arms in terms of creating opportunities for translation of the topics that are of interest to public health. Dave's doing a terrific job on that, and any of you who haven't seen that, you should take a look at publichealthpost.org. We have two panelists who are really an outstanding complement to one another. I'll start with Chris Koller. Chris is the president of the Milbank Memorial Fund and also publisher of the Milbank Quarterly. The Memorial Fund, for those who don't know, is an operating foundation, it's more than 100 years old, that improves population health by connecting leaders with the best information and experience. For any of you who haven't seen it, I would encourage you to go on their website and look at their mission statement. It has the most inspirational population health mission statement of any fund anywhere. It's true, I read it all the time, it inspires me. Before that, Chris served the state of Rhode Island for 8 years as the country's first health insurance commissioner, where he and his team aligned the review with statutory authority to promote health system delivery. And before that, he was CEO of Neighborhood Health Plan of Rhode Island. Joining Chris is Lisa Wong. Lisa Wong is currently senior fellow at the Governing Institute, where she writes, consults, and speaks on a range of issues affecting local and state government. But from 2008 to 2016, Mayor Wong served 4 terms as mayor of the city of Fitchburg in Massachusetts. She was elected to that office in November of 2007 at the age of 28, making her the youngest woman ever elected mayor in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. She has been well recognized for her work as mayor on a broad range of issues. She previously served as executive director of the Fitchburg Redevelopment Authority and has also taught, interestingly enough, taught global economics at the University of Wyoming and worked in human rights while living in Australia. But the really peak on Mayor Wong's CV is that she's a Boston University graduate, and she also got a Young Alumni Award from Boston University in 2015. So we have a panel that is chaired by one of our own and includes 2 people who have been intimately involved in thinking about the issues that are of concern for, I think, all of us as a country as we move into this next administration. I am very excited about this. I'm very excited to be learning from this panel. Thank you for coming. David.
Thank you, Dean Galea. Thank you to everybody, Dean Cox and everyone else who made this panel possible. As I was thinking about coming here, I thought about the last time I moderated one of these panels. Many of you might have been there. It was October 2016, so not that long ago, but it feels like a world away, right? I was sitting up here with John Gruber, John McDonough, and John Kingsdale, and we were talking about whether the ACA is a success, what's likely to happen, what the fate of health reform is as a result of the election. And we gave some lip service to the possibility that Donald Trump would win and what that would mean. And, but at the time, Nate Silver, the New York Times upshot, had Hillary Clinton at winning, her percentage of winning something like 85, 92%, somewhere in there. So we really focused our attention on the tweaks, how to tweak the ACA, how to improve it with the assumption that it's working and we'll move forward. Those seem like quaint times now, right? A lot has changed in those few months. And I am grateful to be in a school where we can have conversations about how all this plays out, what this means. I was here November 9th when we had the school-wide conversation the day after the election, and I thought it was a fascinating conversation. And I'm glad today, in some ways, to continue the conversation, to think about what does the Trump administration mean? How do we respond as citizens, as academics, as students, as public health as a field, and where do we go from here? The conversation today, I think, is going to be particularly interesting in that rather than focus on the federal level, we're really going to pay a lot of attention to the states and to the cities and think about the 50 governors, the 6,000 state legislators, the thousands of mayors, city councilors, and how all of them are impacted and respond to the election. But to start, before I bring Chris and Lisa up here, we're going to do a little bit of an exercise. We're going to do a word cloud. Some of you maybe have done this before. You can see the word that we tested with before. If you haven't done this before, the way it works is you pull out your cell phone and you have to text the word Activist Lab, one word, text that to the number 22333. When I tried it, I separated Activist Lab and it didn't work. And you have to put it as one word. And then once you text that, you'll get a message back from them saying, okay, great, now you're part of this poll. Now you can text the word that you want to show up here on the word cloud. So take a minute and do this, and then we'll talk about it. Let's give it about 20 more seconds. Excellent. Thank you very much. And I think this will, as your texts come through, it'll keep updating. I'm struck that the word facts stayed big for a long time. That's something that really stood out to me. It's very interesting. Accountable is another word that really jumps out. Inclusion, you were primed a little bit to say that, but that jumps out. Humility. So some of these are completely unrealistic. I'll make that obvious observation, but are worth talking about. Okay, so maybe now we'll let the screen stay up for just a little bit, and then I'll invite Lisa and Chris. We can come up to the panel, and we'll start our conversation, if that's all right, reacting to the word cloud and thinking about this, and then we'll come back to that later in the conversation. I don't think it's going to stay. I don't think the screen's going to stay down the whole time we're talking, but maybe for the first part of it, it'd be nice. So with that, maybe Lisa and Chris, if you'll join me on stage. So first of all, thank you again for being here. I'm really excited about this panel. I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation. If I can put you on the spot, do you feel comfortable sharing the word that you texted, if you did one, and then we'll get a reaction to the word cloud?
Well, the first word I shared was love. The last word,
Okay.
I just actually put in BU because I noticed no one put that in.
Okay.
I put in two words. I put in partnership and universal coverage.
Okay. Excellent. Great. Thank you very much. And so I'll bring these back up later in the conversation. But to start, I'm wondering, for context, if each of you could tell us a little bit more about what you do, and maybe frame your response in the context of how the election has affected or not what you do and how you do your work and how you spend your time. We'll start with Lisa and then we'll go to Chris.
Sure. Well, I blame BU for most of what I do these days. So I had some really great professors here, one of which told us economics students that we wouldn't really have a career. We would be doing at least 6 different things with our skill sets that we learned at BU, and to really think about what we love and then how to use our education, our advantage to make those things happen. So that being said, that's sort of how I've approached things. So there's certainly job titles, there's organizations, but for me, it's about creating opportunity for those that don't have it. And that has been the core value since I was very little, and also knowing that my parents' immigrant background, that I could have very easily had a different kind of life. Could have either lived in New York City, because that was a big thing between my parents, Boston and New York City, or we could have stayed in China, or anything could have happened. So I always thought of myself as, what if? What are these alternative lives? And I really wanted to explore what is happening with different people around the globe, and specifically, what is the lens of opportunity? What kind of opportunities do they have that I may not have? What are opportunities that I have that they may not have? And is there a space that we could make a difference in that area, whether it's economic justice or it's public health? So that has been sort of my passion, my curiosity. Getting skill sets here at Boston University enabled me to have a multitude of different careers, from human rights to running a women's nonprofit. So right now I actually have about, I think, 7 or 8 different jobs right now, but they're all really focused on exploring this idea of how to create these opportunities for those that don't have that. And part of that is talking about public policy, changing the public discourse, being an activist, blogging, working with a multitude of organizations. So I know it doesn't sound very concrete, but I think with certainly with the skill sets, with all of the things that are on the plate of this country, of this world, that there's plenty of things that we can do.
Thank you. Chris?
So I just found out that what I do is inspire Dean Galea, which I didn't. He just mentioned in his speech. So that's my takeaway from this, which is pretty cool. But since Lisa sort of went at this from a personal journey, I would say I'll go a little bit backwards. I actually when I went to grad school, I got a master's in management and a master's in religion, and I stole the idea from my then fiance, now wife, and took all these classes in bioethics. It wasn't really until I got to the end of it that I realized what I was really interested in was social ethics, and how do you come up with a collective notion of what's the right thing to do. I come at that from a Roman Catholic faith perspective. I can say that now because Pope Francis has made social justice cool again. For a while we were kind of out in the wilderness, but he's brought us back in. And I realized, for me, over time, from starting out in health insurance and then going into Medicaid managed care, what it really was is public policy. And how do you come up with public policy and a notion of what the common good is, particularly when there are different opinions about it. And so the current gig is at the Milbank Memorial Fund. The leaders that we focus on are primarily state health policymakers, and helping them get some good evidence so they can make good policies in local settings. It's a humbling position, because when you talk to people in different states, you realize that there's a reason why folks live in Texas and not in Minnesota or not in Vermont, or they live in Nebraska. It's because they like the particular values in that place, which might not correspond with what I think are the right values or the common good. I think from a practical standpoint, the Trump administration and state health policies health policies really turn the focus back on the states. So from my standpoint, we're where the action is, because the states look to get some sort of trade, a lot more flexibility in exchange for less money to improve population health. There are lots of risks and opportunities associated with that. So that's kind of what, we were as naive as you and thinking tweaks to the ACA, and now it's like, oh my gosh, block grants or something like that. What's going to happen?
Yeah, so people have asked me then, is my book about the exchanges completely irrelevant now that there might not be an ACA? And I have to say no, because it's my book and I'm trying to sell it, but I really don't think so. I think that really understanding how states have made decisions up to this point and how we got to this point is going to be the foundation that shapes everything going forward. And Chris, let me ask you, I'm very interested in the article that you recently co-authored in the New England Journal of Medicine with a group of state legislators. Wondering if you could talk about the Reforming States Group, what
Sure.
that is, and how that letter came to be.
The Reforming States Group is our sort of focus group of state health policy leaders, about 110 folks from, this year we had 41 different states. And we bring them together, find out what's on their mind, let them exchange ideas. The Massachusetts contingent is led by Senator Harley Chandler. And the rules are the groups from the states have to be bipartisan, R's and D's, and they got to be executive and legislative. So it's a really interesting party. And when you get them in the room, you can't really tell the R's from the D's. You can tell the execs from the legislative because they're constitutionally different. But not the Republicans from the Democrats, because the problem, Lisa and I were talking about this, the problems are all about budgets and building state government capacity and stuff like that. So we got them together last year and said, what are your priorities for a new administration? So the same question we're asking here, that you can all agree on. And it was really interesting because the words exchange, ACA, Medicaid expansion never cross anyone's lips if you're looking for bipartisan agreement. And that was really our principle, was that we all got to agree on this stuff in the service of what can the feds do to help the states improve population health. And we hit on 4 major areas that we published in a letter. I'm sure you've all read it. And then in a New England Journal of Medicine perspective piece that David's referring to. And the 4 were help the feds partner with the states around payment reform, particularly in Medicaid. Second was help the feds have the feds be real partners with the states around chronic diseases and public health. There are some specific initiatives there. The third was data and IT in terms of freeing the data so states can do this work. And the 4th was actually changes that the feds could make, and this is very relevant now, to make the partnership work better. You know, when you hear states complain about federal bureaucracy, you really can't tell the Republicans from the Democrats, because they're equally tortured in terms of getting their Medicaid approvals and things like that. So that's what we came up with, and we've been walking around. It's how do we make that relevant in a repeal and replace debate, you know, where everyone's focused on the bright, shiny object of the ACA. Well, we've got to keep them reminded of, like you guys do, of the long-term goals around, this is all in the service of improving population health. It's not about just, you have to make compromises to do it, but we shouldn't make this about what's the future of the exchanges or is the individual market tanking. We're in this business to help people live long and happy lives.
Yeah, I think it's great. Thank you.
Well, that being said, so when you sort of break that down, and I think about having my mayor's hat on and where's my place in that conversation. So the rooms in which I'm talking to folks like you or in an academic setting are completely different than the rooms where my constituents are. Mm-hmm. So I know in Fitchburg, being one of the poorest communities in Massachusetts and probably New England, people aren't coming to public meetings. They aren't responding to social media tweets. They're watching TV, oftentimes Fox News, or they're in their homes, they're in their living rooms. A lot of our public health initiatives actually involve trying to get funding and or volunteers to literally knock on people's doors and have those conversations in kitchens. And those conversations are vastly different than any conversations that I have. And this is Massachusetts. So I'll give you an example. So we found out that we were saying, let's look at public health statistics because we really want to figure out what quality of life is, how do you measure it, and how to improve that, right? And you know, from a political standpoint, you might think, well, quality of life is great if unemployment is low or there's jobs coming in or there's sort of these like typical things that you see, but how do you really know that when you're actually talking to people? So when we were sitting in people's living rooms or on their front porches, the things that they were talking about were vastly different, right? They don't know what ACA stands for. A lot of them didn't even know who the governor was. Some of them didn't even know that they had a mayor. So reconciling that conversation, I think, is part of the core mission that everyone who thinks that these issues are important have to figure out how to engage in. And at least from a mayor's standpoint, we had to literally go to their homes and have conversations with them and also figure out how to break down those conversations so that they could talk to us. And there were language barriers and there was time issues and there was, you know, kids that need to be tended to or you know, second jobs that need to be held. So I think the part of the conversation is important. So just another side note too is there's a lot going on with the EPA. So the EPA is the only federal agency that I know of that has a local and state government advisory committee. And I was sat on that for 4 years. And one of the things that we really tried to do is we tried to figure out, how does every federal agency have a local and state government advisory committee? Because at least that's one way to help sort of bring federal policy down a couple of notches and talk to mayors or talk to county officials and try to figure out how to reconcile what was going on federally. And it included breaking down the language. It included figuring out physically where offices were, what the language issues are, how people operate. But I hate to say it, I just talked to my friends at the EPA that there's a blackout. They really can't talk to anybody right now. So this hope that I had 4 years ago that we were going to take this model of linking federal, state, and local government, we can't even have the federal government talk directly to us. So I just think that's an important part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's great. And I was really intrigued by your point about actually going into people's living rooms and having conversations with them. And I think that's one of the main takeaways from this election is people in different parts of the country just think very differently. And you can't talk to someone from the middle of the country in the same words or the same assumptions that you do someone from the coast.
But we would have major debates even in the EPA subcommittee, because I would sort of talk about the Northeast, which is very industrialized, and I would get in these sort of major debates with a county official from Idaho who had 56,000 square miles, and it literally took kids like over an hour and a half or 2 hours to get to school. So I mean, the conversations we had were even just trying to figure out, we're on the same page, but how do we reconcile our priorities and also how to implement these priorities?
Sure. And I think an important part of this too is the role of facts. I mean, that was one of the words that really came up on the word cloud too. And I think in academia, often we have the perspective that if we just had better evidence and if we were better at telling people what the evidence was, we'd have a p-value that's convincing and policy would have to fall into place, public opinion would change. But I don't think that's the reality. And I think often in politics, opinion is fact. People believe it, and so it's true. So in your work with governing and everything else you do, and then with Milbank, what is the role of facts? How do you think about the role of facts in the political conversation?
Well, I will tell you that when I first started knocking on doors and I was trying to talk about the facts of a community that at that point in time was facing bankruptcy and had some major issues, that a very good friend of mine who was a political communications director for Howard Dean said, unfortunately, you can't state your case talking about your facts or the facts of the issue. You have to make a connection with people first, and that it takes time to do that. Right, and I think sometimes we want to skip those steps. So I think I spent 7 months talking about people's, like their petunias and their pets and things like that. And that was very counterintuitive to me. In some ways, I almost thought that was counterproductive, but it wasn't, because people didn't want to listen to the bond rating and what that meant, or how long it was going to be before we may not be able to pay salaries in town, or what was going on with the schools. They didn't want to talk about that yet. They wanted to talk about what's going on with them, and that's why I'm not surprised about how successful Trump was, because I see it in my own extended family. I see it in my community. People want to be spoken to, and it doesn't necessarily matter who's delivering it. You can talk about the facts of that person or the illusion of that person, but they want to feel like somebody's reaching out and talking to them. And that connection, it's surprising. Then sometimes they don't even care about the facts. They just say, whatever you need, we'll be there.
Trump is talking to them about their petunias and they like it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the virtue of having Lisa go first is I got to think about my response, because there's so many different things. But I'll go back actually to something that's relevant to the ACA. I'm going to ignore the raw meat around alternate facts, what's haunting us now, and say, when I became health insurance commissioner in Rhode Island, it was 2005. It was a newly created position, and it was to be the healthcare czar, or at least the health insurance czar, to bring health insurance to its heels in Rhode Island. And your question got me thinking about how did I deal with that in terms of dealing primarily with employers who are looking at 10% rates of increase in their insurance and widely varying rates. Some were getting 2, some were getting 16. They didn't quite understand why. It turns out it was because we just passed guaranteed issue and community rating, so we were getting people into the same insurance pool. And they had a lot of misconceptions around what was driving their healthcare costs. If we just reduce the salary of this Blue Cross CEO, it'll pay for everything. Well, $400,000 or $500,000 is not going to reduce premiums on a base of $2 billion. It's all those greedy doctors. It's all those greedy insurers. Everyone had their particular sort of bête noire. And my job was to go out and present the facts to them, to say, hey, look, the health plans are saying that they anticipate 8% price increases to hospitals alone. This is before any change in utilization and anybody else gets any money. Hospitals are 40% of the nut. 40% times 40% of 8 is 3.2%. So that means no one else gets any more money. No one else gets any more services if we just give the hospitals. Well, you can't let the hospitals go out of business. They're really important. They're my biggest employer in Fitchburg. So my job was to keep presenting facts to them in ways that they could relate to say, where do you want the money to go, guys? Where are the cuts going to come from? So that they could start to understand, oh, this is a bigger issue here. You know, when I would go to a budget hearing and one legislator would say, how come my health insurance is so expensive? And the next one would say, yeah, and how come my doc says he doesn't get paid enough? I wanted to say, can you guys kind of square that conversation, okay? Because we can't have it both ways. And you have to keep, I think that's the role of leadership. Whether it could be presenting the facts, it could be having the table conversations, but to make these things happen, you have to take the initiative to go out and try to explain to people, to communicate with them. And I think that's one of the, to bring it back to your question, that's why a big thing, what Sandra talked about, your job is making connections between the evidence and what's happening in the world of policy. You got the most important job around here because you got to translate it into, to make it relevant.
Yeah.
And I think that's really a job for researchers in particular.
Yeah, and that's a real challenge for researchers to figure out how to make that translation. And if I could do a shameless plug, piggybacking what Dean Galea said, for Public Health Post, it's an initiative we're doing here trying to make that connection, an online space to translate research, but for a non-technical audience. And it's hard. It's really hard to do that.
Try explaining health insurance premium increases. Because no wonder Congress is saying,
Yeah.
oh, just give it, you know, they all have their choice that will make it all easy. No, it's complicated.
It's really complicated. So I'm intrigued. I mean, if, you know, there's no way for the president to go door to door, right, and talk to everybody and build that relationship. But President Trump has been enormously effective at Twitter, right, as we've talked about, at effectively doing the same thing, potentially, like making a direct connection with people. He gets criticized a lot for that, but in some ways, is it brilliant? I mean, is that kind of what presidents should be doing, connecting directly with people? Whether you like what he's saying on Twitter or not, it's kind of a different conversation, but I'm curious, as a former mayor, or given your role in insurance commissioner, how you think about that.
Well, I think connection for connection's sake is important, but it's also important why you're making that connection. So if you're making that connection to sort of consolidate power and do what you want without any sort of actual transparency on the complex issues of actually running government, then that's a problem. If you're making connections because you want people to, for example, not only be aware of a local budget process, but actually have their input, then that's another kind of communication. So I think I think communication can be used in ways that are both harmful but also helpful. I think we're sort of demonstrating a classic example of how it can be harmful, especially when it's really about saying, "Don't worry, I'll take care of things." Don't look at things too closely. You know, don't look at the complexity of things. If you think it's too complex, then I'll just sort of, you know, don't worry, I'll take care of it. You know, I'll oversimplify the issue. For example, in economic development, just you know, if you're going to tweet or communicate about the specifics of trying to throw incentives at one particular firm, then you're not then talking about the complexities of economic development and how to make the country more attractive for firms to stay here, right? You might focus on 2,000 jobs, meanwhile another 20,000 walk through the back door. So I think that we're showing perhaps a very dangerous precedent where things are they might not necessarily seem well thought out, they might seem off the cuff, but I think they have a theme to it. And the theme is just sort of, you know, don't think about those things, let me take care of it.
Interesting, thank you. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, Twitter's a new communication medium. I wonder if we were having the same conversations 50 years ago about the dangers of television.
Exactly.
And how
John F. Kennedy.
Right, and how it can dilute. The first time the debate was. It's capable I would say, but again, I'm anchored in the present, of a lot more abuse than television was, but maybe back then people thought television was equally risky. It's a pretty lousy medium. It's great for politicians. You know, Ronald Reagan was the great communicator because he knew how to make the connection. Twitter is a new way to make the connection. It's a pretty lousy way to explain complex issues. It's kind of up to us as citizens, as researchers, as participants to point that out, to say, you know, we're not going to do the ACA in 160 characters. And we've got to, I don't think, working on complex issues like economic development, you need to use Twitter or social media as a way to communicate what you want to do, but you have to, one of the things up there was humility. These things are complex, and they're not going to be solved in 160 characters.
Yep, I think that's right. Let me just pause really quickly and say, in about 10 minutes or so, we're going to open this up to questions, so start thinking about any questions you'll have. But let me shift gears just a little bit and think about the context of the marches that happened over the weekend. There's a lot of questions about where do we go from here? People who are unhappy with the rhetoric or the tone or the conversation, trying to figure out how to engage, where do we go from here? I'm curious to get your reaction to that, and particularly, Lisa, in the context of work you do to encourage more women to run for office, for example, or to be involved in government. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that the step in terms of a big march for me is there's always going to be a very individualistic approach. So creating a menu of options, because I don't know every woman, of course. So, but I hope that there is some way that we can provide a connection to getting more involved in the actual structure of governance. So for me, that includes running for office or joining a board or being somehow involved with an organization that is doing some lobbying, some sort of group that has a larger voice, has context in terms of actual truth or facts or research. So creating those avenues, I mean, if I just sort of said to you in the room, you've come here because there's some sort of connection that you have here, but would you immediately think of one or two or three things that you could do? And I would say probably not. It's not that easy to think of avenues. So one of the things that we're doing in Massachusetts is we're creating these different pipelines. Pipelines for engagement in local nonprofits, pipelines for running for office yourself, pipelines to be able to communicate with organizations that have a larger voice. So that kind of sort of local networking involves a lot of organizing, reaching out, training, not just tweeting, but also sort of reading other people's tweets or Facebooks and recognizing whether someone wants to engage and figuring out how to do that. And you know, certainly things like Emerge or the Pipeline for Change, these organizations that exist in Massachusetts, we are seeing doubling, tripling of interested applicants that we've had to put on more trainings for people who want to get engaged. And so if you have a training about women that want to run for office, not everyone there is there to actually run for office. It's just like not every lawyer wants to go and practice law per se, but it is an avenue for people to talk about what is my own personal message, what is it that I stand for, how do I network with other people that care about the same things, how does local and state government work, how do I get that kind of knowledge so that I can be more empowered, whether it's talking to people in my neighborhood, talking to their own family members, or ultimately what we're hoping is that getting more engaged somehow, joining a board, running for office, writing their own blog, writing tweets about things.
Great, thank you.
So I think I was particularly struck with this in my last job. Good public policy depends on civic engagement, people participating and exchanging views. It was a joke at the state budget hearings in Rhode Island that the first people to testify, the people who got prime position, because that was always it, where you going to sit around, were the veterans who would show up with their veterans hats, because the legislators didn't want to tick them off. And if you're having a hearing on any bill, you know who the lobbyists are. They're the guys who are dressed like me, usually guys. And then if a citizen shows up, they automatically get bumped to the top. So, if you happen to think that and are concerned about this current administration, I'm posing as a condition just to note the fact that a lot of America thinks this is a really great administration, maybe not people here in this room. the most important thing is to be engaged. And I think particularly for those who felt comfortable in the previous administration, if you get alienated by this one, this is my personal, at some point you have to get past the stages of grief and the feelings of learned helplessness and pick your spot and dig in. And you can be overwhelmed by the complexity of it. You can be just depressed by the sheer, what my wife calls another day of fresh hell. But just pick your spot and make a stand. For my sister, for very personal reasons, it's about gun violence. For Lisa, it may be about getting women engaged in the political process. For me, it's about helping state health policy makers make sense of this new responsibility, this increased responsibility they're going to be given. But just for your own mental health, find a place that you can work on, engage with citizens, hopefully not everyone who thinks like you, so there's some diversity, and then just go to work on it. And that's how you're making your contribution, not necessarily to the overthrow of the Trump administration, but to a healthy civic life, which Fitchburg depends on.
I think it's a great point, thank you. And I think it's real interesting, if we look at this moment of time now, people who were comfortable under the previous administration feel alienated by the current administration. It's a parallel to what happened in 2009 when George Bush left and Barack Obama came in. The Tea Party really got started in February 2009, within a month or two. People who felt alienated, worried about the new administration. They had big marches, they had big rallies. But in my research and talking to Tea Party activists, it seemed like the people who really made a difference in shaping policy were the 10 or so people who lived in Jackson, Mississippi or Lansing, Michigan, who went to the state legislative hearings and got to know their legislators by name, by face, really learned the process. In Mississippi, the health insurance exchange was defeated largely in part because people started showing up at the Personnel Review Board hearings, this board that no one has ever heard of, that was a vehicle for blocking contracts and vendors from the state. They got engaged, and I think I didn't always agree with them, but I found it inspiring, and I think there's some lessons to be learned there. So last question before we turn to the audience. Are you optimistic in any particular issues in which there might be compromise with the new administration, either from the point of view of states or cities or other work that you do?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
I might come up with an answer, but not yet.
Okay.
I'm always looking for rays of sunshine. I will say that in our states meetings, we have international folks come, and a guy from Canada who'd been coming for 25 years, it finally dawned on him in this per capita caps discussion. He said, "You mean your Fed's obligation to the states is open-ended? It's just an open checkbook?" And the state said, "Yeah." And he said, "That's kind of crazy." And he was this progressive, left-leaning guy from Saskatchewan. And so, I get the argument that healthcare is sinking us. And that it is stealing money from other places that frankly do much better, like public health funding, that do much better at improving population health. So look at where we're situated even here on this campus. And so I think the possibility that we can, if we can construct a conversation around how much can we afford to spend on healthcare, it can't just be on Medicaid, because then it's too easy to screw poor people. But if we can have a conversation, like you're trying to have in Massachusetts with the Health Policy Commission, of how much can we really afford, that creates opportunities to say, you know what, the money really is better spent on early childhood education, on housing homeless people. And the specific example of that is payment reform. We're having a different conversation around social determinants than we ever have because of the work of Medicare around payment reform.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. So now we're going to turn, there are 2 microphones floating around. So if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you. And then just ask to state who you are and then go ahead with your question.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Cassandra Osei, student here at BUSPH. And my question to both of you, first of all, thank you. My question to both of you is that I don't know how closely you've been following Twitter, as we're talking about Twitter, and the news lately on how those individuals who have voted for Trump are now coming up with Trump regrets, at Trump regrets. So now they're reanalyzing why they voted for Trump. So how do you think the positions you're in, how do you think you'll be able to engage those individuals to bring them to the table, bring them to the conversation? Considering that they felt left out before, what can you do now to engage them?
Just to sort of talk directly about voting, I mean, voter turnout is pretty abysmal. I know that there's been special elections here in Boston where somebody gets elected with less than 8% of just people registered to vote, and then there's a lot of folks who are not registered to vote. I mean, I've spent time in other countries where it's mandatory, and I've always sort of hoped that that was the case. But if there are new voters that have come out, whether it was for Barack Obama 4 and 8 years ago or for Trump, then perhaps that engagement can mean that we can facilitate those more robust conversations. Perhaps Twitter can reach out and be a more universal language so that folks in Texas and Vermont can at least have some more ways of communicating. But then if there is regret, then I'm hoping that there are entities like Emerge or the Pipeline that are there to be an avenue for folks to then say, I am going to attend a meeting right now, or I am going to be much more engaged, or I am going to think differently about, for example, government engagement. You know, it's not going to be just, you know, I want government hands off, but I need to be hands on in terms of how I think about women's reproductive rights, for example, or gun violence. So I'm hoping that those tweets lead to a solidarity that then leads to more action. And I think there's plenty of organizations, some that I'm involved with, that are ready to kind of receive that additional engagement.
So when we look at entities that are working on improving the health of populations, and the distinction we try to draw, I'm sure there are lots of folks here who look at this, is population has a particular geography and maybe a certain subset of the people. But if you try to draw a geography, it seems like the geography that's big enough to get enough resources but small enough that you can have a conversation is somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million. Because that's where you get, people can still feel a connection. They can say, oh, well, that's not just the health insurance commissioner, that's Chris Koller, I've seen him. Or it's why people feel that way about their mayor. So that's like the unit. And then how do you find some questions that people can engage in? When I was thinking about your question, if states got to decide what's in a basic health insurance benefit, let's have that conversation. You know, you do realize that if we make drugs optional, oh no, I can't have that. Well, what about maternity care? Well, maybe that should be optional, but then that means if I get pregnant, I got to buy it and I'm bearing the full cost of it. Let's have that conversation, informed by data and evidence, to sort of see if we can come to some consensus about what is essential and what ought to be at the buyer's discretion. You cannot have that at the federal level. It'll just get destroyed. And I don't even think you can have it in the bigger states. It's got to be small enough that people kind of feel like, oh, all I got to do is pick up the phone, and it's easier for them to engage.
Thank you. Other questions?
Gene DeClerc from Community Health Sciences. And a reformed political scientist, as David knows. And I would just note two things. One, as I do to everybody I walk up to on the streets, I would encourage you to read the book Dark Money by Jane Mayer, which describes a long-term strategy around the right sort of taking control. And I'm not a conspiratorial person, but what it suggests is this isn't a short-term issue. This is a long-term. If we want to reorganize to take back what we think we've lost, it's not going to be done in 2 years. They laid out a strategy that took 20, and it's paid off. All of the things they were working on sort of came to a culmination. And the other piece of that is that provides the infrastructure for a president who isn't really that interested in policy. And he's essentially going to be, over the next couple of years, and I suspect it'll really start happening soon, the distractor in chief. Because he's not a policy person, he just wants the attention. But if we keep looking at his tweets and not watching what's happening in Congress, we lose the opportunity to respond. The action is in Congress, and we need to focus our efforts on that and on the long-term efforts of retaking state legislatures before the 2020 census so we can do redistricting. I mean, this is, again, it's not one little piece. It's going to happen on the ground with organizing and not getting caught up on whatever tweet came out today.
I think it's a fantastic point, and I think I agree completely. The thing that's really alarming for me personally in my politics about Donald Trump is beyond the rhetoric and everything he says, it's the people around him and the agendas they bring and their backgrounds. And there's a really interesting article, I think it was the New York Times recently, last day or two, about that, making the connection between, no, actually it was in The Guardian, a UK paper, I think, looking at the backgrounds of all the people who were in the Trump administration's senior leadership and their connections to the Koch brothers and some of these state-level conservative think tanks. It was fascinating. Any reactions to Jean's comment?
Yeah, I actually was thinking about something that I am optimistic about that is going to be a longer-term strategy, but the mayors are increasingly working together. I know when there was the Paris climate change conversations, mayors were getting together from around the world and having alternative conversations to say that whatever comes out of these big summits, that might not happen overnight, not everybody agrees, but wow, if mayors get together, then we can talk about what we're going to do tomorrow that will make an immediate impact. I know when there was a lot of conversation about gun violence, the NRA dominated the conversation, and Mayor Menino and Mayor Bloomberg came up with something called Mayors Against Illegal Guns. And I remember it was the first thing I signed up for when I became mayor, and it was the first time I ever got death threats. I couldn't actually believe how powerful that organization became as sort of a counter narrative to the NRA. And it's happening with a lot of other issues, but I think there's a lot of sort of local and state leaders that are out there that are not going to be distracted by what's happening. We are concerned about what's happening in Congress because those are things that directly affect our constituents. But then the issue is how do we then get the voters engaged? And I think that is a whole conversation about how do we conversate as well, using Twitter, but not necessarily, again, falling into that distraction, but using, I would say, the good old-fashioned, proven, trustworthy, long-term ways to continue to engage and have a relationship with the voters.
Any clinicians out there? Well, they all had to go off and see patients. So one, I've heard doctors suggest that an additional preventive health check ought to be check in on someone's voter registration. Just make sure they're registered to vote.
Interesting.
By the way, if anybody's interested in running for office or know anybody that is, just come see me afterwards.
Make it happen. Yeah, there's a question. Oh.
Chris, hi. In your state, the individual insurance market was one of your biggest challenges, I know. And part of that market is that young people stay away.
Right.
And that issue of how to involve young people in both the healthcare of the nation, the insurance market, public health, sort of merges into this Twitter, since they're the users of Twitter. Can either of you talk about young people and their engagement in public health and health issues?
Well, as the parent of a 24 and 21-year-old, my kids are probably skewed off it because they've been getting the rhetoric at the dinner table. I'll say, so I'll be a little bit countercultural here. Family values. How are your kids raised? How often do you have dinner together? What happens when you're at dinner together? What are the conversations that you have? That's where character is formed. That's what my wife and I worked really hard at. Now, you can do all that stuff, and my teenage son was still a knucklehead, and you know, he's still sorting things out. But I have great faith in his values and his character as he goes about doing it. So I think there's an example of common cause. We want our kids to grow up in health, and we want our kids to grow up loved, and loved by their particular family members. How can we all support that together? I think. Then there are particular tactics around what do you do with, I'm not sure you're ever going to get a 24-year-old into the insurance market unless you either mandate it or let them piggyback on their parents' coverage. I'm not sure you're going to get a 30-year-old there. So whether you call it a mandate, the mechanism for doing that. Mandate's politically untenable, so Senator Collins and Senator Cassidy have proposed an opt-out. Fine, I'll take that. Either way, it gets them in, which from an actuarial standpoint we need to have. So I hope that, you know, there are things you can do when they're young, and then there are policies you have to put in place just to recognize the math of it.
Well, I'm concerned about the next generation. One of the things I learned here at Boston University is when you have a large young population that is not as hopeful as the previous generation. Their health outcomes, even their longevity, their job prospects are not as good as their parents. When you had an entire history of a country be built on that ideal, that things will always get better, that concerns me, is how are young people going to react? And I'm very concerned because I sort of see both this privilege in having technology and having access to things and having these debates, but not necessarily knowing how to engage it civically or ethically. But then also, just being mayor of Fitchburg, just seeing a whole generation of kids that are completely left behind. Kids where the public health outcomes are not good without major intervention. Seeing childhood obesity rates go up, for example, seeing mental health issues, seeing broken families, and actually trying to work with organizations to measure what are the impacts of these kinds of not just communication cells, but what's happening in our communities. What is that going to do in terms of our kids' mental health state, but also what are the kinds of things that they are going to be hopeful about moving forward. So I mean, we've done a lot of interventions in Fitchburg that have a lot of positive outcomes, but at the same time, in looking at the research and looking at the facts, it's very, very complicated, and there's a lot of work to be done.
And I think we need to think of really young too. My third grader came home the day after the election talking about the conversation on the playground was which of the kids were going to have to leave the country now that Donald Trump won, right? That's how they internalize this. And I think it's alarming. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you for a terrific panel, and I realize I'm probably going to ask the last question, which is perhaps fine for this question. So I'm trying to take the radically optimistic view that this last election in the long arc of time is going to be a positive. And Chris, I appreciated your comment saying, move past your depression and find your niche and move on. That's what I'm trying to do. And my thinking is that if this election serves to highlight the real divides within the country, to highlight real value gulfs, to highlight the real challenges that the country has to grapple with in order to build the solid foundations that promote health, and just like taken from our perspective, that will be a good thing. That it may be terrible in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but it'll be a good thing in 10, 20 years. But for that premise to be correct, all of us need to play our role right. So given that there are a lot of students in the audience, I was wondering if I can ask both of you as a concluding statement to say, in order to make that premise right, what should people be doing first and foremost in the next 4 years to turn an unexpected turn of events that will almost certainly harm the health of populations in the short term to make that a positive?
Well, I think one of the benefits of now working for an organization that does work nationwide and working with people in local and state government from all over the country is, I feel like for me, the biggest gap is spending time understanding why people are different, right? So why did my family or friends or complete strangers that I'm meeting, why did they vote for Trump? Why do they not support the same kind of social or economic stances that I have? Understanding it, but then also trying to figure out, do they have the same willingness to understand my standpoint? And then where are those successful cases where there's actually an intersection of conversation? Because right now I feel like groups and organizations are sort of getting much more radicalized, or they're getting engaged in a very sort of a superficial standpoint. And I'm really struggling to understand where are successful conversations happening? Not necessarily successful outcomes, but successful conversations, so that we can actually dig down and figure out what are the components that we can then build upon, so that when we do want to have larger engagement, or we do want to talk about issues, that we can use that as a foundation, whether you work for a public policy organization or you work for a private company or you're a public official.
Great, thank you.
So this is a little bit glib, but I would say make a habit of cultivating personal hope. I'm not sure where you got your belief that that to paraphrase Dr. King, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We all phrase that in different ways, but believe that positive change can happen. And part of that, for instance, is everyone here, by virtue of being enrolled in a master's program, you're all winners. You may not feel like economically you're winners, and you look askance at people who went chasing some higher paying degree, but you're going to have many, many more career choices than most people in this country. You begin from a position of gratitude at the choices that you've been provided, and I think that allows you to respond with some sense of hope. Lisa set this up very well at the beginning. You're not, for the students here, your career only makes sense in retrospect. You don't know what the heck it's going to be when you start. It's only when you look back that's like, oh, okay, I see how the choices sort of happen. And you make your choices in informed ways with that sense of hope and knowing what's important to you. And if you do that, then you're going to find your, Sandra, I think you're talking in terms of the very personal, you're going to find yourself drawn into places that make sense with your particular values. And that makes for a much more rewarding career over time. If you can make choices that are consonant with what you believe is important. It's just, and I believe that redounds to society as well.
I think if I may just reflect back for 1 second, the notion that Chris, you're saying about using one's time in a let's say training program to clarify what one's values are, to clarify how one thinks, and to figure out how one builds then a career on those values. And Lisa, to use the opportunity of a place like a university to convene conversations to help us inform a broader national movement forward. These are, to my mind, really core to what we stand for as a university. So thank you very much for those comments.
Thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you. And let me thank Chris and Lisa both for being here today. It's been a fantastic conversation. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you all.